Hey gang, Craig Ripley here, and as you can see, I've decided it's time to clean all of the bugs and road grime off of the Vision. I've been back for a week now, and it's time to do it. I've been kind of procrastinating, but today's the day. Now, I also thought that while I'm cleaning it up, it might be a good time to start some of these debrief videos about this 60-day trip that I just got back from. First, I guess let's talk about the bike and how the bike did on this trip. And overall, I mean, if you followed any of my daily update videos, you know that I had no major problems with this bike at all. Again, no flat tires. I had, no mechanical issues at all. The only thing that I really had a complaint with was that it didn't really like the altitude all of that much. Once I got up, around the 6,000 foot area, the bike didn't want to start very well. So I had to give it some more gas to get it going. But other than that, once it was running, on the highway or on the road, it was fine. Said no issues whatsoever. It was just starting the bike up. So a couple of times when I was at really high altitudes, if I was pulled over to take some pictures or something, I just left the bike running, took my pictures, looked around, and then got back on the bike. So that's the only thing that I had to worry about. So I guess I should point out that at least the reason that I think that I was having these problems at altitude is primarily because I've done a lot of performance upgrades to this bike. I have cams in it, I have a fuel controller, and I have a timing wheel in this bike that is all designed to increase horsepower and torque, of course. The stock Victory Vision will put about, somewhere around 88 horsepower to the rear wheel. Well, this one does 117 and 114 foot-pounds of torque. However, I had all that dynoed and tuned back here at 160 feet above sea level. So it's understandable that getting up in altitude, it's going to have a little bit of a problem. Now, however, I have to say that as I went on in the trip, it got better, right? Even when we got up to altitude, like when Kathy was riding with me, I really wasn't seeing the problem anymore, at least not to the same extent. So I think the bike, kind of learned as we went along. But at first, it was a little bit of an issue. Now the Vision actually handles pretty well for a big bike. But I have to say, it is a big bike, right? So when, you get on some really twisty back roads and things, especially when you are loaded down, well, it's a handful, right? So that's one of the reasons I'm thinking of maybe going a little bit lighter, a little bit sportier with this. Said the Vision has been a great bike over the last 2 years, or 10 years, excuse me. But I have had it for 10 years, and I am thinking that, well, it's time for a change. So I'm thinking of going, just a little bit lighter, and something that handles a little bit better. Still has to be comfortable, again, because Kathy has to sit back there. If it was just me, I'd just keep the Tenere and I wouldn't worry about having another bike. But I have to have one that Kathy's going to be comfortable on. Now, a question that I had was, how did I manage to go 60 days out there, 58 days really? I ended up getting home a little bit early, which I'll touch on here in a second. But the original plan was 60 days. So how did I manage to do that and not have any major issues at all? In fact, very few minor ones, right? No flat tires, again, no mechanical problems, no problems with me, right? Overall, everything went extremely, extremely well. What do I attribute that to? Well, primarily planning, preparation, and then I guess execution of that plan. Right? If you've watched my videos before, you know I am a meticulous planner. Right? And then I also prepare. Right? I make sure that the bike is in good shape. For example, before I leave, I make sure that I've got a good set of tires. I don't push the tires, right, on the mileage. For example, when I changed my tires at around 10,000 miles in Rapid City, I probably could have gone a little bit farther, but they were right at the wear bars on the rear. I said, well, it's time to change them. If I push them, maybe I might get another 1,000 or 2,000 miles out of them. Then again, I may end up stranded out in the middle of nowhere. So personally, I'd rather just change them, be done with it, make sure you're on a good set of tires, and you don't have to worry about it. Another thing I did a lot of preparation on was me. Right? I got myself in good shape, right? Some of the best shape that I've been in a number of years. I went back to CrossFit and was working out. Right? Lost about 10 pounds, again, making sure that I was in the best shape that I could be before I headed out. Now, and then also, I cleaned up my diet an awful lot before I left. And I was doing that for several months before I hit the road. And then while I was out there, I made sure that I didn't deviate too much from my normal diet. I allowed myself some leeway to have an occasional dessert. Kathy and I shared a piece of cheesecake a couple of times, right? And also, I love to have a beer at the end of the day. So I allowed myself the ability, right, to do that, right? That's just something I really enjoy, and I'm not going to give it up. So that's the one thing. I probably drank too many beers while I was out there on the road. But overall, I still lost 4 pounds while I was out there riding, right, which is pretty typical. Motorcycling is more strenuous than you think that it is, right? You burn about 200 calories an hour, right? So if you're out there for 8 hours, right, you're burning about 1,600 calories, or about half a pound, right? So again, you can lose weight easily just by eating normally while you're out there on the road. And before we stop on this topic, I do want to say I'm not trying to tell you how to eat, right? We had a little discussion on keto diet plans and so forth while we were doing these update videos. But the point isn't that you should follow one specific kind of eating plan. The point is that whatever that is that you are doing before you leave, don't deviate too much from it. If you do, if you start eating a lot of carbohydrate-rich or sugary foods and you're not used to it, well, you're probably going to bind yourself up pretty good, right? So if you aren't used to drinking a beer every day, well, you probably shouldn't start while you're on the road, right? So just make sure that you keep the basic diet that you went out there with so that you're not upsetting your metabolism too much. And one more thing, I got to talk about hydration, right? Make sure you stay hydrated, right? That's a big part of what I do. Right, I have a tank bag that I put on the Vision, and it has a hydration bladder inside it. So I filled that up constantly and was drinking from it all day long. Right. Also, there was a point where I was starting to have some cramps, right, at night. Right, so I switched over from just drinking water to a sports drink with electrolytes in it, and that really helped me out. So once I did that, I was good. Again, I just made sure that I was staying hydrated every day. All right, so I got all the grime off the bike. Now it's time to break out the bike spirits. But before I do, I want to say one more thing about taking care of yourself. And that is, you don't want to push yourself to the point of exhaustion, right? Make sure that you build in pretty much regular stops. Right? Like while Kathy and I were together, we were doing it every 70 miles or so. So approximately every hour, let's say, hour to hour and a half. Right. However, when I was by myself, sometimes I did push it farther, 100 miles, even 150 miles a couple of times. But that was primarily because there was just no place to stop. While I was going through New Mexico, there was a 150-mile stretch with just nothing. So I had no choice but to really keep going. Right. However, for the most part, I tried to stop at least every 100 miles, make sure I got off the bike, did a little stretching, got some water, whatever it is I needed to do to keep myself fresh. Also, I limited the mileage per day. Right? You know, on this trip, we were around the 200-mile range. Now, there were a couple of longer days in there, a 560 and a 460, but most of the days were in the 200 to 300-mile range. Right? So we kept it to a place where we weren't going to get really exhausted by the end of the day. We'd get in at a decent time, again, and be able to enjoy the evening, right? Or if we needed to stop and see something, we could do that without having to worry about running into a time issue. So the last thing we'll talk about here is close calls, because I had some questions on that. Did I have any close calls while I was out on this trip? And you know, what did I do about them, I guess. So first of all, I did have a couple of close calls, which I talked about in my update videos, where I almost dropped the bike with Kathy on it. One was I was coming around a corner that was a tight blind corner, and I knew that there was a construction area above, but I did not know it was going to be right in the middle of the corner. So as I rounded this corner, there's a car waiting in line there. So I had the bike leaned over to the right a little bit, as the corner was a right-hand turn and it's cambered back to the right. And so the bike got a little bit off balance there as I came to a stop, and I had to fight it for a couple of seconds. But we got it back upright. And then another time was when we were pulling off the highway onto a gravel area, and as I was coming to the stop, the front wheel just kind of locked up on me and started sliding. So again, we had a little bit of trouble there. Kathy saved us by throwing her weight to the other side, and then we were able to right the bike. But other than that, again, we really didn't have any close calls with, again, dropping the bike or so forth. I did have one, however, with deer. I was on my way to Fargo, North Dakota, and the highway was divided at that point. There was a median in the center, and the median had a dip in it. So as I'm going 80 miles an hour, which is what the speed limit was there, two deer come popping up from the median onto the road, and they're headed across the highway. And I'm calculating in my mind where I'm going to hit these deer. And so I immediately grabbed a handful of brake. I started moving over to the right-hand side of the road to give them as much room as I possibly could. And quite honestly, I'm aiming for the gap between the two deers. I'm hoping that I can hit that gap and get through without too much damage. But luckily, at the last second, they saw me, they turned around and went back. Now, if I hadn't moved over to the right-hand side, would I have given them enough room to see me? I don't know. So maybe that is how I ended up averting that situation. But other than that, that were the only really close calls that I had. There were, of course, idiot drivers who pull out in front of you or swerve over the center line and so forth. But again, they were all far enough away that it was no big deal. So I guess that's it. No real close calls, again, other than that deer. I think that made my heart thump a little bit. All right, gang, so thanks for watching, and if you like what we're doing here, please subscribe. And if you want to support the channel, there are several ways to do that in the description of this video, including buy a t-shirt, you can buy my ebook, you can become a Patreon, or you can buy from Twisted Throttle by linking through my website. So all those things are greatly appreciated. And if you don't want to do any of them, well, that's okay too. Thanks for watching.